At 6:30 in the morning, relentless pounding shook my front door. A sheriff's deputy stood on the porch, papers in hand. Writ of possession. You have until 2 p.m. My name was printed there as if I were a stranger in my own home. Across the street, my daughter and son-in-law stood watching, silent, their faces satisfied. My daughter called out, "You should have signed when we asked nicely, Mom." Her husband added, "Pack your things. Today is the deadline." I didn't scream. I just asked the deputy one question, and his expression changed. Thank you so much for being here with me. Before we go any further, take a second to leave a comment and let me know, where are you watching from today? Your presence truly matters, and I read every comment. And just a quick note, parts of this story are dramatized to support reflection and learning. Any similarities are coincidental, but the message shared here is meant to be genuinely helpful. The pounding started before my brain did. Heavy, deliberate knocks, not the kind a neighbor makes. This was the sound of authority, the kind that doesn't ask permission to wake you at 6:30 on a Thursday morning in late May. I sat up in bed, heart already moving faster than it should. The sunlight through my curtains was soft and golden, promising a beautiful spring day. But the knocking didn't match that gentleness. I reached for my robe, hands not quite steady. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a man in a tan uniform. A badge gleamed on his vest. Behind him, a patrol car sat at the curb. I opened the door with the chain still on. "Ma'am, are you Eleanor Mitchell?" "Yes." My throat felt dry. He held up a clipboard. "I'm Deputy Marcus Johnson with the County Sheriff's Office. I'm here regarding a court order." Court order. The words landed in my chest like stones. "A writ of possession, ma'am. An eviction order." He paused. "A default judgment was entered 2 weeks ago. This writ authorizes me to secure possession of the property today." The world tilted. Default judgment. I never went to court. The court record shows service was completed. Without a stay order from a judge, I'm authorized to execute this writ. The deadline is 2 o'clock this afternoon. This afternoon? Yes, ma'am. I'm not here to determine ownership. I'm here to execute a court order. My hands wanted to shake. I didn't let them. "This is my house," I said quietly. "My husband and I bought it 35 years ago." Something flickered behind his eyes. "Ma'am, if you believe the order was improperly obtained, contact the court immediately. You need to act quickly." That's when I looked past him across the street. They were standing near my neighbor's mailbox. My daughter Nicole, arms folded. Her husband Kyle beside her, hands in his pockets. They weren't surprised to see a sheriff's deputy on my porch. They were waiting for it. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face still. "May I see the papers?" Deputy Johnson glanced over his shoulder. He saw them too. When he looked back, his jaw had tightened. "Yes, ma'am." He handed me the papers. "I'll need to return by 2 o'clock. If you don't have a stay order by then, I'm required to proceed." I took the papers. My daughter's name was right there, Nicole Patterson, plaintiff. Deputy Johnson pulled a card from his pocket and wrote on the back, "This is the civil unit number. If you can get a stay, call them immediately." It wasn't legal advice. It was a decent man telling me I still had a chance. "Thank you, Deputy." He nodded and walked back to his patrol car. Across the street, Nicole turned toward her car. Kyle followed. Neither looked back. The clock in my hallway chimed 7 times. I closed the door and locked it. The deadbolt sliding into place seemed too loud. I looked at the papers, official stamps, case numbers, legal language designed to confuse. At the top, Mitchell versus Patterson, my last name against my daughter's married name. I walked to the kitchen and set the papers on the table. Robert's coffee mug still sat in the dish drainer. The roses he'd planted were visible through the window, blooming pink in the early light. 35 years in this house. 35 years of mortgage payments and roof repairs. 2 years since Robert died and left it to me through a will that was properly filed, properly probated, properly recorded. And now my daughter had gone to court and told a judge I had no right to be here. My hands were steadier now. The shock was fading, replaced by something colder. 7.5 hours. That's what I had to figure out, what my daughter had done and how to stop it. Deputy Johnson was still standing on my porch, papers in hand. Behind him I could see Nicole and Kyle across the street, waiting, watching. I looked down at the documents he'd just shown me. The top sheet was labeled writ of possession, heavy legal language court seals, case numbers. My name was printed at the top, Eleanor Mitchell, defendant. I scanned it quickly. Default judgment. Unlawful detainer. Eviction authorized by order of the court. Enforcement deadline 2 o'clock this afternoon. Deputy, I said, keeping my voice steady, can you tell me where this was served? He pointed to a line near the bottom of the second page. Says here, service was completed at 128 Maple Terrace Apartment 3B. Substituted service. An adult occupant accepted on your behalf on May 15th. I stared at the address. That's not my address. He looked up. What? I live here. 1847 Oakwood Drive. I've lived here for 35 years. That address, 128 Maple Terrace, that's my daughter's apartment. Deputy Johnson's expression shifted. Just slightly, but I saw it. He glanced back at the paperwork, then at me. Who accepted service? I asked. I read the signature line before he could answer. Nicole Patterson. My daughter, I said quietly. The plaintiff. His jaw tightened. He didn't say anything, but I could see him processing it. A plaintiff accepting service on behalf of the defendant at the plaintiff's own address. Even I knew that didn't sound right. Deputy, may I take pictures of these documents? He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. You're allowed to photograph court papers. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. The writ, the service address, Nicole's signature, the case number, every page. I flipped through the stack quickly. There were more documents attached, exhibits. They were labeled. Buried in the middle, I saw one titled, Quitclaim Deed. My name was at the top, Eleanor Mitchell Grantor, and at the bottom, Nicole Patterson and Kyle Patterson grantees. There was a signature above my printed name. My brain refused to process what it meant. I just focused on getting clear photos of everything, every page, every signature, every stamp before the deputy left. Ma'am, Deputy Johnson said, his tone softer now. If you believe service was improper, you need to file an emergency motion with the court, today, before 2 o'clock. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. The civil unit number is on the back. They can tell you what forms to file. I took the card. If you don't have a stay order by 2 p.m., he continued, I'll have to come back and enforce this writ. I don't have a choice. That's my job. I understand. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he glanced back across the street at Nicole and Kyle still standing there, still watching. His expression hardened. Good luck, ma'am, he said quietly. He walked back to his patrol car and drove away. I stood on the porch alone, holding my phone and the business card. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Across the street, Nicole's arms were crossed. Kyle said something to her and she nodded. They thought this was over. They thought I'd panic or cry or give up. I didn't. I turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind me. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the photos on my phone, zooming in on each one. The writ, the service address, the quitclaim deed, Nicole's signature accepting service for me. I didn't understand all of it yet, but I understood enough. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate, and I had 7.5 hours to fight back. The door closed behind me with a soft click. I locked the deadbolt, then the chain. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The shock had burned off, leaving something clearer in its place. I went straight to the bedroom and pulled the fireproof safe from the closet shelf. Gray metal combination lock. Robert had bought it the year we paid off the mortgage. Inside, everything was organized from after his funeral. The deed to the house recorded 2 years ago in my name alone. The probate distribution order. Property tax bills going back 5 years, all paid. Homeowner's insurance current and active. Evidence that this house was mine. On the nightstand, a framed photo caught my eye. Nicole at 7, gap-toothed and grinning. I'd taken that picture on the front porch. I reached over and turned the frame face down. I couldn't think about that little girl right now. I carried the documents to the kitchen and spread them on the table. Then I checked the time. 7:45. The courthouse wouldn't open for another 15 minutes. I used the time to make copies, organizing everything into a folder. While the printer hummed, I wrote a timeline on a notepad. Default judgment writ issued, improper service. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Just accept it. In December. Nicole had sent this from a number I didn't recognize, but she'd signed it. Just accept it. Accept that my daughter had tried to take my home without telling me. I took a screenshot, added it to my evidence folder. At 8 o'clock, I grabbed my purse and walked out the back door to the garage. I didn't want to go out the front. The drive downtown took 20 minutes. I found parking across from the county courthouse, a tall limestone building that had stood in Charlotte longer than I'd been alive. The security checkpoint was busy with lawyers and people clutching folders. I put my things on the conveyor belt and walked through the metal detector. The security guard glanced at my folder. "You need directions, ma'am. Civil Division, 3rd floor. Elevators that way. Good luck." The elevator opened on 3 at 8:12. A sign pointed right Civil Division clerk's office. The hallway smelled like floor wax and old paper. When I reached the counter, there was already a line. 3 people ahead of me, all holding their own folders, their own emergencies. I took my place and waited. At 8:15 exactly, a clerk appeared and called, "Next." The line moved forward. One person went to the counter, then another, then the third. Each transaction seemed to take forever. Forms passed back and forth, questions asked, stamps pressed onto paper. I shifted the folder in my hands and watched the clock on the wall. 8:23. 8:27, 8:31. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to 2 o'clock. Finally, the woman ahead of me finished and stepped aside. "Next," the clerk called. I walked up to the counter. The clerk looked up at me, a man in his 40s with tired eyes and a name tag that read, Daniel Foster. "How can I help you?" "I need to file an emergency motion to stay in eviction." My voice came out steady. "The writ is being executed at 2 o'clock today." His eyebrows rose. "That's soon." "Yes, and I was never properly served." The plaintiff signed the service documents themselves. He typed something into his computer, then looked back at me. "Do you have the case number?" I slid the writ across the counter. He picked it up, read it, and his expression changed as he typed the case number into his system. Then he went very still, staring at his screen. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I need to show you something." He turned his monitor slightly so I could see. On the screen was a list of court filings, case documents, exhibits, and there listed as Exhibit C was something that made my stomach drop. Quitclaim deed, Eleanor Mitchell to Nicole Patterson and Kyle Patterson. A deed, transferring my house to my daughter and son-in-law. A deed I'd never signed. By 8:30, I was standing at the civil clerk's counter on the 3rd floor of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. A man in his early 40s looked up from his computer. His name tag read Daniel Foster. "I need to file an emergency motion to stay enforcement of a writ of possession," I said. He took the paperwork, I handed him the writ, the service returned my driver's license and scanned it quickly. Case number 2025-CV-8847, Mitchell versus Patterson. He typed it into the system. His eyes moved across the screen. "I see it. Default judgment entered May 15th. Writ issued yesterday." He looked up. "You're the defendant." "Yes." "And you're representing yourself?" "I am." He nodded and pulled up a blank form. "All right. Let's get the motion filed. You'll need to state your grounds why the court should stop the eviction." "Improper service," I said, "and fraudulent documents." He paused. "Fraudulent?" "Yes." Daniel clicked through the case file. "There are attachments here. Let me pull them up." He opened the first one. A scanned image filled the screen, a quitclaim deed. Eleanor Mitchell to Nicole Patterson and Kyle Patterson, dated May 10th at 2 in the afternoon. I'd seen this document an hour ago when I photographed the eviction packet on my porch, but seeing it enlarged on the court monitor, I could see details I'd missed before. The signature, supposedly mine, was too careful. The loops were wrong. The tail on the M was too short. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a forgery. Cold, calculated. "There it is," I said. "A deed I never signed." Daniel studied the screen. He didn't comment, just opened the next document. A residential lease agreement. Landlords Nicole Patterson and Kyle Patterson. Tenant Eleanor Mitchell. Monthly rent $1,200. "They forged a lease, too," I said, "to make it look like I'm renting my own house." Daniel's face remained neutral, but I saw his eyes narrow slightly. He pulled up another document, the proof of service. "Ma'am," he said carefully, The court file shows that service was completed at 128 Maple Terrace Apartment 3B. He turned the monitor so I could see it. The law requires service to be made at the defendant's actual residence. Is that your address? No, that's my daughter's apartment. I live at 1847 Oakwood Drive. I've never lived at Maple Terrace. He nodded slowly. I'm noting here that the service address matches the plaintiff's address listed at the top of the complaint. He highlighted both addresses on the screen. They were identical. You should point that out to the judge in your motion, he said. Be very specific about where you actually live and where you were supposedly served. I understood immediately. Improper service. If I was never properly notified, the entire default judgment could be invalid. Daniel handed me a stack of forms. Fill these out completely. Emergency motion to stay and motion to vacate default judgment. List every issue: improper service, forged deed, fraudulent lease. Attach copies of your ownership documents, anything that proves the property is yours. I have those. Good. And if you have proof you were somewhere else when the deed was supposedly signed, bring that too. I do. He glanced at the clock. Judge Whitman handles emergency motions in Department 14. She has a 1 o'clock docket. If you get this filed by 11, I can try to get you on today's calendar. Today. The writ is enforceable at 2 p.m., he said. If you don't have a stay-by, then it's over. I took the forms and sat down on a bench in the hallway. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from adrenaline. 3.5 hours. I started filling out the forms. My handwriting was steady, deliberate. Every blank I filled was another step toward the truth. Every box I checked was a chance to fight back. By the time I looked up, it was 9:15. I had the first piece of evidence, but I needed more. I sat on the courthouse bench with the folder open in my lap, reviewing the documents I'd just filed. The emergency motion was complete. Daniel had promised to get it in front of Judge Whitman by 1 o'clock. Pastor Green was on his way with the sign-in log from May 10th. But as I scanned the forged deed one more time, something nagged at me. Why May 10th? Nicole and Kyle could have chosen any date to fake my signature, but they'd picked a specific Wednesday afternoon, a time when they knew I'd have an alibi. It didn't make sense, unless they'd planned for that, too. I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through my text messages. There, early May. A series of messages from Nicole. Hey, Mom, just checking in. How are you feeling? You seemed a little distracted last week. Everything okay? At the time, they'd seemed like normal concern. But looking back, there was something off about them. Something calculated. Then I found it May 2nd. She'd stopped by the house unannounced. Mom, I've been worried about you, she'd said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Her voice had been soft, but her eyes had been sharp. Worried about what? Your memory. She'd leaned forward, her expression carefully arranged into concern. Do you ever forget things, lose track of time? Feel confused? I'd laughed. Nicole, I'm 62. I'm not senile. I'm not saying that. But her tone suggested otherwise. It's just, Dad's been gone 2 years and you're living alone in this big house. If you ever felt like things were slipping, we could help. There are doctors who specialize in, I don't need a doctor, I'm fine. She dropped it after that. But over the next few days, she'd circled back little questions, little comments. Did you forget we talked about this? You already told me that story. I'd brushed it off at the time. Now sitting in this courthouse hallway, I understood. She was planting seeds. If I seemed forgetful or confused, she could argue I had signed those documents I just didn't remember, or that I wasn't competent to manage my own affairs, that I needed someone to step in, someone like her. My jaw tightened. On May 6th, 4 days after that conversation, I'd called Dr. Stephen Wright's office and made an appointment, not because I believed Nicole's insinuations, but because I wanted proof that they were false. The evaluation had been thorough, memory recall pattern recognition, problem-solving tasks. Dr. Wright had scored it himself, then looked up at me with a slight smile. 30 out of 30, Mrs. Mitchell, perfect score. You're sharper than most people half your age. I'd thanked him, filed the report at home, and thought nothing more of it. Until now. I pulled up Dr. Wright's office number and dialed. Wright Medical Associates, this is Carla speaking. Carla, this is Eleanor Mitchell. I was in for a cognitive evaluation on May 6th. I need a certified copy sent immediately. It's for a court hearing this afternoon. There was a pause. A court hearing. My daughter is trying to claim I'm mentally incompetent. I need documentation proving otherwise. I'll email it to you right now. What's your address? I gave it to her, and less than 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Subject Cognitive Assessment Results. Eleanor Mitchell, May 6th. I opened the attachment. Official letterhead, Dr. Wright's signature, and the score 30 out of 30. Cognitive function normal. No impairment detected. I forwarded it to Daniel with a single line, Exhibit E. They're going to claim I'm incompetent. This proves I'm not. Then I sat back and stared at the ceiling. Nicole hadn't just forged a deed. She'd spent weeks laying groundwork, planting doubt about my mental state, asking leading questions, building a narrative. She'd planned this carefully, but so had I. Without even knowing I was doing it, I'd built my own defense. The cognitive evaluation, the church volunteer log, the documents proving ownership. Every piece of paper in this folder was an answer to a lie she hadn't even told yet. I looked down at my phone. 9:45, 3 hours and 15 minutes until the hearing. Nicole thought she'd been clever. She had no idea what was coming. At 11 o'clock, I took the elevator down to the second floor. The county recorder's office was in the same building as the courthouse, a convenience I hadn't appreciated until now. 2 hours until the hearing. 2 hours to shore up every crack in my case. The office was quiet, just a few people waiting at the counter. I approached the desk where a woman with dark hair and reading glasses was reviewing a stack of documents. "Excuse me, I need to place a fraud alert on my property." She looked up. "I'm Jennifer Walsh. What's the address?" 1847 Oakwood Drive, Pinehurst. She typed it into her system, then frowned. "There's a recent recording here. Quit claim deed filed May 10th. Is that the document in question?" "Yes, I never signed it." Her frown deepened. "Let me pull up the image." She clicked through a few screens, then turned the monitor toward me. There it was, the forged deed scanned in black and white, my supposed signature at the bottom, and in the corner, the notary block. Jennifer leaned closer, squinting at the screen. Then she zoomed in. "Wait, look at this." She pointed to the notary commission number. At first glance, it looked fine. But when she enlarged it, I saw what she'd noticed, a thin line cutting through one of the digits. A correction. Someone had crossed out a number and written over it. "That's not allowed," Jennifer said flatly. "Any correction to a notary commission number invalidates the document. This should have been rejected when it was submitted." "Can you print that?" I asked. "With the correction visible?" "Absolutely." She adjusted the contrast, highlighting the strike-through, then sent it to the printer. A moment later, she handed me a crisp copy with the irregularity circled in red ink. "I'm placing a fraud alert on the parcel right now," she said, typing quickly. "Anyone trying to transfer or encumber this property will be flagged. And I'm noting the notary irregularity in the system." "Thank you." She looked at me with something close to sympathy. "Good luck in court." I took the printout, but I didn't leave immediately. I pulled out my phone and found the contact information for Susan Hendricks, the notary listed on the deed. I dialed. "Hello. Ms. Hendricks, this is Eleanor Mitchell. You notarized a quitclaim deed on May 10th that transferred my house to my daughter. I'm standing in the county recorder's office right now looking at your notary stamp. There's a correction mark on your commission number." Silence. "Ms. Hendricks, I have a court hearing at 1 o'clock today in Department 14 with Judge Barbara Whitman. The judge is going to see this irregularity. You can come to the courthouse voluntarily and explain what happened, or I can file a formal complaint with the Secretary of State and let them investigate. But either way, this is coming out." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What courtroom?" "Department 14, Judge Whitman, 1 p.m. She hung up. I didn't know if she'd show up, but I'd given her the choice and the warning. I rode the elevator back up and stepped outside onto the courthouse lawn. The May sun was warm on my face. I sat on a bench beneath a magnolia tree and pulled out my phone. An email notification sat at the top of my screen. From Wright Medical Associates, subject certified cognitive evaluation, Eleanor Mitchell. I opened it. Dr. Wright's letterhead filled the screen, followed by a formal assessment summary. MMSE score 30 out of 30. Clinical impression. No cognitive impairment detected. Patient demonstrates excellent memory, reasoning, and executive function. I forwarded it to Daniel Foster with a note, Exhibit D, proof of mental capacity. By the time I looked up, it was almost noon. I saw him before he saw me. Pastor Green walking up the courthouse steps with a folder under his arm. Eleanor. Michael. I met him halfway. Thank you for coming. He opened the folder and handed me the sign-in log. There on the page for May 10th was my signature. Time in 1:30 p.m. Time out 4:15 p.m. You were there the whole afternoon, he said. I remember talking to you around 2:30 about the delivery routes for the next week. I stared at the page. Proof in ink that I couldn't have been signing a deed at 2 o'clock. Will you testify to that? I asked. Of course. I added the log to my folder. Deed fraud, service fraud, notary irregularity, alibi with witness corroboration, cognitive evaluation. I looked at my phone. 12:30. Time to go to court. At 12:35, I stood alone in the courthouse restroom staring at my reflection. 5 minutes until I had to walk into that courtroom. 5 minutes until I faced my daughter and her husband in front of a judge. I pulled out my phone and opened my voice memos. There it was, buried in a folder I'd labeled April Backup. Kitchen Conversation, N&K, April 28th. I pressed play just to make sure it was still there. Kyle's voice came through tinny, but clear. We're in financial trouble. I stopped it. The file was intact. I'd backed it up to 3 different places, cloud storage, my laptop, and external drive. They didn't know it existed. They had no idea. I closed my eyes and let myself remember. It had been late April 4 weeks ago. Nicole had texted that morning asking if she and Kyle could stop by. Nothing unusual. But when they'd arrived, something felt wrong. The way Kyle kept glancing at Nicole. The way Nicole kept her arms crossed her jaw tight. We'd sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Robert and I used to have coffee every morning. I'd set my phone down between us, screen side down recording app already running. Mom, we need to talk, Nicole had started. Kyle had cut her off. We're in financial trouble, serious debt. Credit card's a bad investment. We need this house. I'd stared at him. What? We need you to sign it over to us, he'd said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. We can sell it, pay off what we owe, start over. This house isn't the solution to your problems, I'd said slowly, and it's not for sale. We're not asking you to sell it, Nicole had said. Her voice had been flat, detached. We're asking you to transfer it to us. Family. No. Kyle's expression had hardened. Then we'll find another way. I'd felt a chill run down my spine. What does that mean? Nicole had leaned forward, her eyes meeting mine with a coldness I'd never seen before. It means we'll do what we have to do, with or without your permission. Are you threatening me? Neither of them had answered. Kyle had stood first and Nicole had followed. They'd walked out without another word. I'd sat there for a long time after they left, listening to the recording playback. Their voices, their threats, their plan laid bare in my kitchen. I opened my eyes and looked down at my phone again. April 28th. 3 weeks later, a forged deed had appeared in the county records dated May 10th. 3 weeks after that threat, they'd tried to take my house using fake documents and a falsified signature. Premeditation, conspiracy. All of it captured in a 4-minute audio file. I checked the backup one more time, cloud laptop, external drive. All there. If they tried to claim I'd fabricated it, I had metadata. Timestamps. Proof that the recording existed weeks before the deed was forged. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and took a breath. Nicole and Kyle thought they'd been so careful, forging the deed, manipulating the notary, filing for eviction at an address I didn't live at. They'd built an entire fraud piece by piece, assuming I had no idea it was coming. But I'd known. Not the details. Not the forgery or the fake lease or the fraudulent service. But I'd known something was wrong the moment they'd sat down at that table and demanded my house. And I'd hit record. I glanced at the time, 12:40. The hearing was about to begin. Nicole and Kyle would walk in with their lawyer, confident that I had nothing. No proof, no defense. They had no idea I was about to play them their own words. I pushed open the restroom door and walked toward the courtroom. Time to let them hear what I'd heard. I stepped out of the restroom and saw them immediately. Nicole, Kyle, and a man in a dark gray suit with silver hair carrying a leather briefcase. He had the polished look of someone who spent a lot of time in courtrooms, confident posture, crisp white shirt, expensive watch. Attorney David Brennan. I'd seen his name on the eviction paperwork. They were standing near the courtroom entrance heads close together, speaking in low tones. Nicole saw me first. Her expression didn't change, no surprise, no guilt, just cold calculation. Kyle nudged Brennan and the three of them turned toward me. Brennan approached with his hand extended, a practiced smile on his face. Mrs. Mitchell, David Brennan, I represent your daughter and son-in-law. Perhaps we can settle this before we go in front of the judge. Save everyone some time. I didn't take his hand. I don't think so. His smile tightened. Mrs. Mitchell, I understand this is emotional, but... This isn't emotional, I said evenly. This is fraud. Nicole stepped forward. Mom, you're embarrassing yourself. You're making this so much harder than it needs to be. I looked at her. Really looked at her. This was the girl I'd raised. The girl I'd sat up with through nightmares and fevers. The girl whose wedding I'd paid for. And now she was standing in a courthouse hallway trying to gaslight me into giving up my home. Harder for who? I asked quietly. Kyle cut in, his voice smooth and patronizing. Eleanor, you're not thinking clearly. We know this has been confusing for you. That's why we're here to help, to make sure you don't hurt yourself financially. I'm not confused, I said. Mom, Nicole's tone sharpened. You don't even remember signing the papers, do you? You've been forgetful. We've all noticed. The judge is going to see that too. And there it was, their strategy laid out in the courthouse hallway like a blueprint. They were going to claim I was elderly and incompetent, that I had signed the deed I just didn't remember, that I was a danger to myself and needed them to step in. Kyle leaned closer, lowering his voice as if he were speaking to a child. We're trying to protect you. Before you do something you can't take back. I haven't done anything. I said, my voice steady. You forged my signature. You filed fraudulent documents. You committed a crime. Brennan held up a hand. Mrs. Mitchell, those are serious accusations. If you can't prove them, you're going to find yourself in a very difficult position. I can prove them. Nicole laughed, short, sharp, bitter. With what you have nothing. I didn't answer. I just looked at her. The courtroom door opened and a bailiff stepped out. Mitchell versus Patterson. Judge Whitman is ready. The hallway went quiet. I picked up my folder from the bench where I'd set it and walked toward the door. As I passed Kyle, I heard him mutter under his breath to Brennan, just loud enough for me to catch. She's got nothing. This'll be over in 30 minutes. I kept walking. Inside the courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a handful of empty benches. At the front, behind a raised desk, sat Judge Barbara Whitman, a woman in her early 50s, with short dark hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. I took my seat at the defendant's table on the left. Nicole, Kyle, and Brennan sat at the plaintiff's table on the right. The bailiff closed the door. Judge Whitman looked down at the paperwork in front of her, then up at both tables. Let's begin, she said. I folded my hands on the table and waited. Kyle thought I had nothing. He was about to find out how wrong he was. All rise. The bailiff's voice cut through the quiet. I stood, my hands resting on the folder in front of me. Across the aisle, Nicole, Kyle, and Brennan rose in unison. Judge Barbara Whitman stepped through the door behind the bench, black robe, sharp eyes already scanning the room. She took her seat. Please be seated. We sat. Judge Whitman adjusted her reading glasses and glanced down at the papers in front of her. This is Mitchell versus Patterson, case number 2025CV8847. Emergency motion to stay enforcement of a writ of possession and to vacate a default judgment. Mrs. Mitchell, you're representing yourself. Yes, Your Honor. And you are, she turned to Brennan. David Brennan, Your Honor, representing the plaintiffs Nicole Patterson and Kyle Patterson. Judge Whitman nodded. Mr. Brennan, your clients filed for eviction based on a quit-claim deed and a residential lease. Mrs. Mitchell claims improper service and fraudulent documents. Walk me through your position. Brennan stood smoothing his tie. Your Honor, this is an unfortunate family matter. My clients are Mrs. Mitchell's daughter and son-in-law. They're deeply concerned about her well-being. I felt my jaw tighten. Mrs. Mitchell did sign the deed transferring the property. Brennan continued. She also signed a lease agreement to remain as a tenant. The issue is that she doesn't remember doing so. Judge Whitman looked up. She doesn't remember... No, Your Honor. Mrs. Mitchell is 62 years old. She's a widow. She lives alone. Over the past several months, my clients have observed signs of cognitive decline, forgetfulness, confusion, disorientation. They believe Mrs. Mitchell signed the documents during a period of clarity but has since forgotten due to ongoing mental impairment. The words hung in the air. I stared at Brennan. He was lying calmly professionally with the kind of confidence that made it sound like fact. Your Honor. Brennan went on, my clients didn't want to take legal action, but when Mrs. Mitchell became increasingly combative, they had no choice. They acted out of concern for her safety and financial stability. Judge Whitman's gaze shifted to me. Mrs. Mitchell, what's your response? I stood. Your Honor. I'm not confused. I didn't sign those documents. My signature on the deed and the lease was forged. I can prove I was somewhere else when the deed was allegedly notarized. And I can prove I'm of sound mind. Brennan cleared his throat. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is exactly the kind of denial we've been dealing with. This is consistent with memory impairment. Mr. Brennan, Judge Whitman said sharply, let Mrs. Mitchell speak. Brennan sat. Judge Whitman looked at me. You're claiming the signature is forged? Yes, Your Honor. And you have evidence? I do. I have notary irregularities on the deed itself. I have proof of improper service. The eviction was served at an address where I don't live. I have an alibi for the date and time the deed was supposedly signed with a witness. And I have a certified cognitive evaluation from a licensed physician showing no impairment whatsoever. Judge Whitman leaned forward. You have a cognitive evaluation. Yes, Your Honor, dated May 6th. I scored 30 out of 30 on a standardized memory test. The doctor's report states my cognitive function is excellent, well above average for my age. I saw Brennan's jaw tighten. Nicole and Kyle exchanged a glance. Judge Whitman looked down at her notes, then back at me. When did you obtain this evaluation? 3 weeks before the deed was filed. Why? I glanced at Nicole. Because my daughter started asking me questions about my memory. She wanted to know if I was forgetful, if I felt confused. It seemed strategic, so I went to my doctor and had myself tested. I wanted documentation. Judge Whitman's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. You anticipated this. I anticipated something. The judge turned to Brennan. Mr. Brennan, your clients claim Mrs. Mitchell has cognitive impairment. She's presenting medical evidence that contradicts that. Do you have any medical documentation supporting your claim? Brennan hesitated. No, Your Honor. Our observations are based on interactions over several months. Observations, not medical records. Correct. Judge Whitman looked back at me. Mrs. Mitchell, you said you have substantial evidence. Let's see it. I picked up the folder. This was it. I pulled the first document from my folder, a crisp official letterhead with Dr. Stephen Wright's name at the top. I handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to Judge Whitman. She put on her reading glasses and scanned the page. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her eyes pause at certain lines. Cognitive assessment, she read aloud. Patient Eleanor Mitchell. Evaluation date May 6th. She looked up at me. That's 3 weeks before the deed was filed. Yes, Your Honor. She continued reading. MMSE Mini Mental State Examination. Score 30 out of 30. She paused. That's a perfect score. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Whitman flipped to the second page. Clinical impression patient demonstrates excellent memory reasoning and executive function. Cognitive performance well above average for age group. No impairment detected. She set the document down and looked at me. Why did you get this evaluation, Mrs. Mitchell? Because my daughter started asking me questions, I said. In early May, around the 2nd or 3rd, she came to my house and asked if I was feeling forgetful, if I was confused, if I lost track of time. It felt deliberate, like she was planting something. So I called my doctor and scheduled a cognitive evaluation. I wanted proof that I was fine. Judge Whitman's gaze shifted to Nicole. You asked your mother if she was confused. Nicole's face flushed. I was concerned. She's living alone, and I thought, you thought she had cognitive decline. Yes. And you told your attorney that... Nicole hesitated. We told him we thought she was having problems. Judge Whitman turned to Brennan. Mr. Brennan, you stood in this courtroom and told me Mrs. Mitchell has observable cognitive decline, forgetfulness, confusion, disorientation. This evaluation, dated 3 weeks before the deed was signed, shows a perfect score. Excellent cognitive function, no impairment. How do you explain that? Brennan stood slowly. Your Honor, we acted in good faith based on the information our clients provided. If there was a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. Judge Whitman's tone was sharp. Your clients told you their mother was mentally impaired. This document says the opposite. Either they were mistaken or they lied. The courtroom went silent. Brennan cleared his throat. Your Honor, my clients genuinely believed... Mr. Brennan. Judge Whitman's voice cut through his words like a blade. Your clients are sitting right here. Let me ask them directly. She turned to Nicole. Ms. Patterson, did you tell your attorney that your mother was incompetent? Nicole glanced at Kyle, then back at the judge. We thought she was having memory problems. Based on what? Based on conversations. Things she said. Things she said, Judge Whitman repeated. And yet 3 weeks before the deed you claim she signed, she scored perfectly on a cognitive test administered by a licensed physician. Does that sound like someone with memory problems? Nicole didn't answer. Judge Whitman looked back at the evaluation, then at me. Mrs. Mitchell, you said you anticipated this. You knew they were going to claim you were incompetent. I suspected it, I said quietly. The questions Nicole asked felt like a setup, so I documented the truth. Judge Whitman leaned back in her chair. Her eyes moved from me to Nicole to Kyle, and I could see the shift happening, the skepticism settling and the credibility draining away from the plaintiff's table. Mrs. Mitchell, she said, you mentioned you have more evidence, notary irregularities, improper service, an alibi. Yes, Your Honor. Let's see it. I reached into my folder again. Across the aisle, Kyle's jaw tightened. Nicole stared at the table in front of her. Brennan sat down, and for the first time since the hearing began, he looked uncertain. Judge Whitman was listening now, really listening, and I was just getting started. I pulled out the next document, a photocopied page with neat columns and handwritten signatures. I handed it to the bailiff. Judge Whitman took it and studied the page. What am I looking at, Mrs. Mitchell? A sign-in log from St. Mark's Community Church, Your Honor. Wednesday, May 10th. She scanned the columns. I see your signature here. Time in 1:30 p.m. Time out 4:15 p.m. Yes, Your Honor. The deed claims I signed it on May 10th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but I was at the church food bank that entire afternoon. I've volunteered there every Wednesday for 15 years. Judge Whitman looked up. You have a witness. Yes, Your Honor. Pastor Michael Green is here. The judge nodded to the bailiff, who stepped into the hallway. A moment later, Pastor Green entered, gray hair, kind eyes, wearing a simple button-down shirt and slacks. He walked to the witness stand, and the bailiff swore him in. Please state your name for the record, Judge Whitman said. Michael Green. I'm the pastor at St. Mark's Community Church in Pinehurst. Pastor Green, do you know the defendant Eleanor Mitchell? I do, Your Honor. She's been volunteering at our food bank for 15 years, every Wednesday afternoon without fail. Were you at the church on Wednesday, May 10th? I was. Was Mrs. Mitchell there? Yes, Your Honor. She signed in at 1:30 and stayed until after 4. I spoke with her personally around 2:30 that afternoon. We were discussing the delivery schedule for the following week because we'd received extra donations. Judge Whitman glanced down at the deed in front of her. So, at 2 o'clock, the time the deed claims Mrs. Mitchell signed it, she was at your church 3 miles away organizing food donations. That's correct. Judge Whitman leaned back in her chair. Thank you, Pastor Green. You're excused. Pastor Green nodded and stepped down. As he walked past me, he gave my shoulder a light squeeze, silent reassurance, and left the courtroom. Judge Whitman looked at Brennan. Mr. Brennan, your clients claim Mrs. Mitchell signed a deed at 2 p.m. on May 10th. She has a sign-in log and a credible witness placing her somewhere else at that exact time. How do you explain that? Brennan stood. Your Honor, let me show you something else, I said, pulling another document from my folder. I handed it to the bailiff. Judge Whitman took it. What's this? The proof of service filed with the court, Your Honor. The document that shows I was served with the eviction notice. She examined it, her brow furrowing. This says service was completed at 128 Maple Terrace Apartment 3B. An adult occupant accepted service on your behalf. She looked up. Is that your address, Mrs. Mitchell? No, Your Honor, that's my daughter's address. Judge Whitman's eyes narrowed. She turned to the signature line. It says here that Nicole Patterson accepted service on May 15th. She looked across the aisle. Ms. Patterson, is that your signature? Nicole hesitated, then nodded. Yes. You accepted service for your mother in a lawsuit you filed against her. Yes. Judge Whitman set the document down slowly. Ms. Patterson, you are the plaintiff in this case. You cannot accept service on behalf of the defendant. That's improper service. The defendant has a right to be notified at their actual address, not yours. Nicole opened her mouth, then closed it. Judge Whitman's voice grew sharper. Did you tell Mrs. Mitchell about this lawsuit? We tried. Did you serve her at her home? At 1847 Oakwood Drive. No. So you filed for eviction, accepted service yourself at your own apartment, and allowed a default judgment to be entered without your mother ever knowing there was a lawsuit. Silence. Judge Whitman looked at Brennan. Mr. Brennan, did you know your clients accepted service at their own address? Brennan's face had gone pale. Your Honor, I reviewed the service return. I assumed it had been done properly. It wasn't. Judge Whitman said flatly. She flipped through the case file in front of her, her jaw tight. This case should never have reached a default judgment. The service was fraudulent. The defendant was never properly notified. She looked up at me. Mrs. Mitchell, you mentioned there was another detail about the deed. Yes, Your Honor. I said, my voice calm but firm. If the court would look again at Exhibit C, the quitclaim deed. At the bottom, in the notary's identity verification section, there's a driver's license number listed as proof of my identity. Judge Whitman put her reading glasses back on and peered at the document. I continued. The license number on that deed ends in 931. But Your Honor. I pulled out my wallet and removed my driver's license, handing it to the bailiff. My actual driver's license, which I've had for 10 years, ends in 617. Nicole was in such a hurry to fabricate this document that she either used a fake identification number or confused mine with someone else's. It proves that the person who supposedly signed that deed wasn't me, and that the notary never actually checked the ID of the person signing. Judge Whitman held my license up to compare it with the deed. Then she looked up at Nicole with an expression so cold I saw my daughter flinch. A very interesting technical error, Ms. Patterson. The judge said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Nicole stared at the table. She said nothing. Judge Whitman was no longer neutral. She was angry. And I wasn't done yet. If you're still here, I want to pause for just a moment. At this point in the story, if you were in my place, would you choose to confront the truth or stay silent to protect family? Share your honest thoughts in the comments below. Just a quick note before we continue, the next part includes dramatized elements for storytelling and reflection. Some details may be adapted, so feel free to stop here if you prefer. Your Honor, I said, I have one more piece of evidence. Audio evidence. Judge Whitman looked up sharply. Audio? Yes, Your Honor. A recording from April 28th, 3 weeks before the deed was filed. She leaned forward. Go ahead. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the small speaker I'd brought, and pressed play. The courtroom went silent. Then Kyle's voice filled the room. We're in serious debt. Credit card's a bad investment. We need this house. My voice quieter. This house isn't the solution to your problems. Kyle again. Sign it over to us. We can sell it, pay off what we owe. I'm not signing anything. A pause. Then Kyle's voice colder. Then we'll find another way. And finally, Nicole. Flat. Emotionless. We'll do what we have to do, with or without your permission. The recording ended. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Judge Whitman looked at Brennan. Mr. Brennan, Do your clients dispute the authenticity of this recording or the voices identified? Brennan glanced at Kyle, whose face had gone gray. Nicole stared at the table in front of her, saying nothing. Your Honor, Brennan said slowly, I would need a moment to consult with my clients. You have 10 seconds. Brennan leaned over and whispered urgently to Kyle and Nicole. Kyle shook his head slightly. Nicole didn't move. Brennan straightened. No objection to authenticity, Your Honor. Judge Whitman nodded. The recording is admitted into evidence. She turned to Kyle. We'll find another way. 3 weeks later, a forged deed appears in the county records. Is that the other way you meant? Kyle's jaw tightened. That was taken out of context. It was recorded, Judge Whitman said flatly. The context is very clear. You told your mother-in-law you'd take her house with or without her permission. Then you did exactly that. Kyle said nothing. Before anyone could respond, the courtroom door opened. A woman in her early 40s stepped inside, pale and clutching her purse. Susan Hendricks. Judge Whitman looked surprised. Ms. Hendricks, Susan's voice shook. Your Honor, I was contacted this morning by Mrs. Mitchell. She told me there was a hearing today about a deed I notarized. I came because I need to tell the truth. Judge Whitman's expression shifted something between skepticism and cautious respect. Approach the bench. Susan walked forward slowly, clutching her purse. The bailiff swore her in. Ms. Hendricks. Judge Whitman said, Do you have your notary journal with you? Susan nodded and pulled out a small leather-bound book from her purse. She handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Whitman flipped to the entry for May 10th. Walk me through this notarization. Did you witness Eleanor Mitchell sign this deed? Oh, Susan's eyes filled with tears. No. Speak up, please. No, Your Honor, I didn't witness her sign. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Then why is your signature on this deed? Judge Whitman asked. Susan's voice broke. Nicole brought the deed to me. It was already signed. She said her mother had signed it earlier but forgot to get it notarized. She's my neighbor. She pressured me. I knew it wasn't right, but She stopped, wiping her eyes. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Judge Whitman set the journal down. Her expression was carved from stone. Ms. Hendricks, you understand that notarizing a document without witnessing the signature is fraud. Yes, Your Honor. You'll be hearing from the Secretary of State's office regarding your commission. You're excused. Susan nodded and hurried out of the courtroom, still crying. Judge Whitman turned back to me, then to Nicole and Kyle. Let me summarize what I've heard today, she said. Mrs. Mitchell has a perfect cognitive evaluation. She has an airtight alibi proving she couldn't have signed the deed. She has proof of improper service. She has a recording of you threatening to take her house without her permission. And now I have a notary admitting she falsified the notarization. She leaned forward. You didn't just file a fraudulent eviction. You orchestrated it. You planned it. And you lied to this court about every single aspect of it. Nicole stared at the table. Kyle's face had gone gray. Judge Whitman looked at me. Mrs. Mitchell, I've seen enough. Judge Whitman closed the notary journal and set it aside. She looked down at the case file, then up at both tables. I've heard enough, she said. The courtroom went still. This court hereby vacates the default judgment entered on May 15th. The writ of possession is dissolved. The unlawful detainer case is dismissed with prejudice. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for weeks. Judge Whitman wasn't finished. She turned to Nicole and Kyle, her expression hard. Ms. Patterson, Mr. Patterson, you attempted to steal your mother's house. You forged her signature on a deed. You fabricated a lease agreement. You filed for eviction using fraudulent service. You lied to this court about her mental capacity. You threatened her. You manipulated the legal system. Nicole stared at the table. Kyle's jaw was clenched tight. Elder abuse. Judge Whitman continued, is one of the most despicable acts a person can commit. To exploit your own mother for financial gain is beyond reprehensible. She began writing on a form. I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation. The charges I'm recommending include fraud conspiracy to commit fraud forgery, elder financial exploitation, and coercion. Brennan shifted in his seat but said nothing. Judge Whitman looked at me. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm ordering that certified copies of this ruling be provided to you. File them immediately with the county recorder's office to clear any cloud on your title." "Yes, Your Honor, thank you." She turned back to Nicole and Kyle. "I am also issuing a temporary restraining order. You are hereby prohibited from contacting Mrs. Mitchell in any form by phone, text, email, or in person. You are restricted from coming within 500 feet of her residence. Violation will result in immediate arrest." Nicole's face flushed, but she didn't look up. Judge Whitman looked at the bailiff. "Contact the sheriff's civil unit. Inform them the writ of possession has been dissolved. Mrs. Mitchell is not to be disturbed." "Yes, Your Honor." She turned to her notes one more time. "As for Miss Susan Hendricks, her notary commission will be referred to the Secretary of State for revocation proceedings." Judge Whitman picked up her gavel. "This case is closed. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck the bench with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. It was over. Nicole and Kyle stood. Brennan gathered his papers quickly, not meeting anyone's eyes. The three of them walked toward the exit. No apology, no acknowledgement, no remorse. Just silence. They weren't sorry for what they'd done. They were sorry they'd been caught. I stayed seated, watching them disappear through the doorway. The bailiff approached and handed me a folder. "Certified copies of the orders, ma'am. Judge Whitman had them prepared while you were presenting evidence." I took the folder. Inside were the court's orders vacating the default judgment, dissolving the writ, dismissing the case, issuing the restraining order. All of it official, signed, stamped. Proof that I'd won. I stood slowly, picked up my own folder, the one I'd filled with evidence over the course of one frantic morning, and walked toward the exit. Deputy Marcus Johnson was waiting in the hallway. When he saw me, he straightened. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said quietly, "I heard what happened. I'm glad it worked out. Thank you, Deputy, for everything." He nodded. "You did good." I walked past him through the courthouse doors and out into the May afternoon. The sun was bright, the air was warm, and my house was still mine. I stepped out of the courtroom at 2:45. The hallway was quieter now. Most of the morning's crowd had cleared. But Pastor Green was still there, sitting on the same bench where I'd waited hours earlier. He stood when he saw me. "Is it over?" "Yes, the case was dismissed. Criminal charges have been referred to the DA." He exhaled relief, crossing his face. "Thank God." "Thank you," I said, "for coming, for testifying, for the log. Eleanor, you've been part of our community for 15 years. Of course I came." I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. "Do you need anything?" he asked gently. "No, I just need to finish filing the paperwork." He squeezed my shoulder, the same gesture he'd given me in the courtroom. "Call if you need anything. Anything at all." I watched him walk toward the elevators, then turned and headed back to the county recorder's office on the second floor. Jennifer Walsh looked up when I walked in. "Mrs. Mitchell, I heard the ruling came down. Congratulations." I handed her the certified copies. "I need these recorded." The judge said to clear the cloud on the title. She took the documents and scanned them quickly, her expression shifting to something like satisfaction. "The fraudulent deed has been voided by court order. I'll record these immediately. Your property is protected. Thank you for everything you did this morning. The notary irregularity, you caught it." "It's my job," she said, but she smiled. "I'm glad it helped." I left the office with another set of stamped copies in my folder and took the elevator down to the lobby. Outside, the afternoon sun was still warm. I blinked against the brightness and saw a familiar figure standing near the courthouse steps. Frank Dalton, my neighbor. He was holding his hat in his hands. "Frank, Eleanor." He walked over, his face serious. "I heard there was a hearing today. Justice served." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Good. That's good. If you need anything, if they come back around, you call me or call the police. Don't hesitate." "I won't. There's a restraining order now." "Good," he said again. Then quieter. "I'm sorry it came to this. Family shouldn't do that to family." "No," I said, "they shouldn't." He put his hat back on and tipped it slightly. "Welcome home, Eleanor." I walked to my car in the courthouse parking lot, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door. And then finally alone, my hands started to shake. I gripped the steering wheel and took 3 deep breaths in through my nose, out through my mouth. The adrenaline that had carried me through the morning was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its place. Tears pressed at the corners of my eyes, but they didn't fall. I wouldn't let them. Not yet. I thought of Robert, of the house we'd bought together 35 years ago, the place where we'd raised Nicole, the place where I'd sat with him during his last days holding his hand, promising I'd be okay. I kept it, I thought. I kept our house. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, driving through downtown Charlotte and onto the highway toward Pinehurst. The roads were familiar. The late afternoon light was golden. Everything looked the same as it had this morning. But nothing was the same. I pulled into my driveway at 4:30. The house stood there just as I'd left it, brick facade, front porch, Robert's rose bushes along the walkway. It looked the same, but it was safe now, protected, mine. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door. Then I picked up my folder, got out, and walked inside. I was home. 3 months later, late August, I sat at the kitchen table with a letter from the district attorney's office. Nicole and Kyle had pled guilty on August 18th. I read the sentencing summary twice, letting the words settle into something real. Nicole, 18 months in jail, 5 years. Probation, $15,000 in restitution. Kyle, 24 months in jail, 5 years probation, $20,000. The restraining order was now permanent, effective for 10 years. They were prohibited from contacting me in any form. No calls, no letters, no messages through third parties. Susan Hendricks had her notary license permanently revoked. She'd paid a $5,000 fine and received 6 months probation. The Secretary of State's office had added her name to a public registry of sanctioned notaries. There had been a small article in the local paper the week after the sentencing brief, factual, buried on page 7 in the court proceedings section. Local woman sentenced in elder fraud case. I'd clipped it and filed it away with the rest of the documents. Evidence that it had happened, that I hadn't imagined it. There had been no apology from Nicole, no letter slipped under the door, no message passed through an attorney. Just silence. And maybe that was answer enough. I folded the letter and set it aside. The house was different now. I'd changed every lock the week after the hearing, new deadbolts, new keys, new sense of security. I'd installed a video doorbell and security cameras covering the front porch, back door, and driveway. My important documents, deeds, wills, tax records. The certified court orders were organized in labeled folders inside the fireproof safe in my bedroom closet. Not paranoia, prudence. There's a difference. Pastor Green still stopped by once a week, usually on Thursday afternoons. We'd sit on the front porch with iced tea and talk about church events, the food bank, the weather, the Carolina Panthers' chances this season. He never asked about Nicole unless I brought her up first. I appreciated that more than I could say. Frank Dalton still kept an eye on things from next door. He'd wave when he saw me working in the yard, and once a week he'd walk over with some excuse, returning a borrowed rake, asking about my tomato plants, and check if I needed anything. I didn't usually, but I was grateful he asked. It reminded me I wasn't invisible, that people still saw me as a person, not a victim. I still volunteered at the food bank every Wednesday afternoon. Same time, same people, same routine. The other volunteers had heard bits and pieces of what happened, small towns talk, but no one pried. They just welcomed me back, handed me a clipboard, and put me to work sorting canned goods. Life went on, quietly, steadily. Robert's rose bushes were thriving. I tended them every morning, deadheading spent blooms, checking for aphids, watering when the soil felt dry. Sometimes I talked to him while I worked the way I used to when he was still here. We did good, didn't we? I think he would have been proud. Not of the fight he hated conflict, but of the fact that I'd stood my ground without losing myself in the process. I lived alone, but I wasn't lonely. There's a difference between solitude and isolation. I had my routines, my community, my house, my peace. Every morning I woke up, checked the security cameras on my phone, poured a cup of coffee, and sat on the front porch. The neighborhood was quiet. The air smelled like cut grass and honeysuckle. Safe. I still had Nicole's childhood photos on the wall in the hallway. A little girl in pigtails holding a stuffed rabbit, laughing on a swing set, blowing out birthday candles. That child had existed once. She'd been real, and I mourned her more than I mourned the woman she'd become. I didn't know when she'd changed. Maybe it had been gradual, small choices, small compromises, until one day she woke up and didn't recognize herself. Maybe it had always been there, hidden beneath good manners and forced smiles. I'd probably never know. But I'd learned things. I'd learned that you can love people and still protect yourself from them. That family doesn't mean blind loyalty. That documentation can save your life. That staying calm is a strategy, not a weakness. That age doesn't equal incompetence. That you have every right to defend what's yours, even from the people who share your name. Losing my daughter to greed hurt worse than any eviction notice ever could. But I survived it, and I kept my dignity. If your own child tried to steal your house, would you fight back? Or would you let guilt and love convince you to surrender? I chose to fight, not with rage or revenge, but with paperwork, patience, and the truth. Because sometimes the greatest betrayal teaches the hardest lesson: you deserve protection, even when the threat comes from your own blood. Especially then. The house is still mine. The roses are still blooming. The mortgage was paid off years ago, and the deed, the real one, is locked in my safe. And every morning when I wake up in the house Robert and I built together, I don't hear pounding at the door anymore. I hear birds singing outside the window. Mourning doves, cardinals, the occasional blue jay. And that silence, that peace, sounds like victory. If you're hearing my story and thinking it could never happen to you, don't be so sure. I never imagined my own daughter would try to steal my home. But God has a way of revealing truth when we need it most, and He gave me the clarity to see what was coming before it was too late. Don't be like me in one way. Don't wait until someone threatens you to start protecting yourself. Document everything. Keep records. Verify signatures. These family drama stories happen more often than you think, and the victims are usually grandmothers who trusted too much and verified too little. But do be like me in this: trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it probably is. God gave us intuition for a reason. When Nicole started asking about my memory, I listened to that small voice inside and got tested. That one decision saved my house. Here's what these family drama stories teach us. Family doesn't mean blind loyalty. Love doesn't mean letting people harm you, and age doesn't mean helplessness. I was 62, living alone, and they assumed I'd be easy to manipulate. They were wrong. God doesn't promise we won't face betrayal, but He promises we have the strength to survive it. Every Wednesday at that food bank, I saw His faithfulness in the people who showed up for me. Pastor Green Frank, Jennifer Deputy Johnson. Community matters, faith matters. And grandma stories like mine aren't about weakness, they're about resilience. So protect what's yours. Stay sharp. Keep your documents organized. And remember, if someone tries to take what you've built, you have every right to fight back, not with rage, but with truth. Because paperwork, my friends, is mightier than manipulation. And that's a lesson worth remembering. Final note. This content contains dramatized storytelling elements for educational purposes. Some details are fictionalized, but the lessons and messages are entirely valuable. If this style doesn't resonate with you, that's okay. Please seek content that better fits your needs.